Periodically on this program, we check in with an organization called Pro English. And I've mentioned on the program before, of course, their efforts are to really lobby government to create, at least make a move in the direction of saying that English is the official language of the United States. And I've got to mention, if you were listening early in the program, you may have heard me bring this up. And often, what you see as soon as somebody in legislatures, state level, or even at the federal level, makes a move to get behind a bill like this, newspaper editorials all over the country start denouncing them. But as I pointed out, most of those editorials are written in English because if your local newspaper was printed if our local daily was printed in, oh, I don't know, Bulgar or Italian or Spanish, they wouldn't have much of a, it's already a dwindling reading audience, but it would be even much smaller. And they don't seem to be able to, the irony hasn't yet struck them. It's 17 minutes after 9 o'clock, or 17 is the temperature, excuse me. It's 6 minutes after 9 o'clock. And thank you for joining me, Bill Colley, on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Joining us today, Stephen. Stephen, you pronounce it Gushoff, if I remember, right?
That is correct, Bill.
And joining us from Pro English this morning, welcome back.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Merry Christmas.
Hey, thank you. I'm glad to hear someone else say that. To begin with, one of the reasons you're joining us today is, looks like we might be seeing at least some action when it comes to legislative action, and you're at least still working diligently on this. What's the status at the moment?
Well, there's a couple of different rails, basically, that we're pursuing here in Washington. I'm talking to you right from Capitol Hill, just a couple of blocks away from the U.S. Congress, where our offices are located. And to let your listeners know, we support passage of the English Language Unity Act, the English Language Unity Act in Congress. It's already been sponsored in both the House and the Senate. And what that would do is it would make English the official language of the United States for governmental operations only. Because sometimes people don't understand. They think we're trying to ban the speaking of all foreign languages outside of English, etc. No, not at all. This is just to make English the official language for governmental operations only. And we advocate every day on Capitol Hill and try to get new co-sponsors. Just this past week, we had two new co-sponsors, Representative Doug LaMalfa from California and Representative Adrian Smith from Nebraska just joined on. And it's it's a challenge on Capitol Hill, particularly in the House, obviously, where you have the Democrats in control, and they're not going to do us too much. They're not going to give us too much help, frankly, to try to get it passed or even for a vote. Although, frankly, the prior Republican speaker didn't help us out at all either. But what we're trying to do is a bit of an end around that is we're trying to get the English Language Unity Act included as an amendment in a larger immigration or budget bill. Senator James Inhofe of Oklahoma has been particularly helpful to us. And so we've attempted and will continue to attempt to include that as an amendment in a larger immigration or budget bill, with the hope that the larger bill is passed and then English becomes the official language as part of it. While we're doing that, we're kind of working both ends of the street here in Washington. We're also at the White House a lot. We've had 7 meetings in recent months with different aides to President Trump and Vice President Pence about having President Trump sign an executive order that would make English the official language of the USA. Just to give your listeners a little bit of background history, back in August of 2000, Bill Clinton signed an executive order, number 13166, and that mandated foreign language translations and interpretations for anyone that receives any government funding whatsoever. So let's say you or one of your listeners has a clinic, let's say, and they receive government funding. Someone comes into that clinic in Twin Falls and demands foreign language translation into Swahili, let's say. That person receiving the funding has to go find a translator in Twin Falls or nearby that speaks Swahili and can translate at their cost. And back during the Bush 43 administration, about 15 years ago, a government study was done that showed at that time, 15 years ago, it was probably costing Americans about $2 billion, that's billion with a B, $2 billion a year to fund this foreign language translation and interpretation. There's been no government study done since that time. I don't think the government wants to know what the cost is today. I'm sure it's something north of $2 billion a year. And so we've had, like I say, several meetings with different aides to President Trump and Vice President Pence to try to get him to sign a new executive order, which would effectively repeal and replace EO 13166, signed by Bill Clinton, make English the official language of the USA, and do away with these forced government-mandated foreign language interpretations and translations. We've even done a draft executive order for the White House, and they're reviewing it right now. Executive orders are a whole process at the White House. You'll see on TV President Trump holding up an executive order that he's just signed, but it's not like he just made up his mind, 10 minutes before that to do it. I mean, this is a whole long process. They have a whole executive order committee at the White House that reviews all drafts and every word, every punctuation mark, etc. So we're in the middle of that right now. So hopefully, frankly, it would be a lot easier for President Trump to do it. We know we have an ally in the White House. President Trump used to say all the time when he was campaigning in 2016 that if you want to assimilate in this nation, you have to speak English. Vice President Pence, when he was a member of Congress from Indiana, 5 times in 5 Congresses, was a co-sponsor of the English Language Unity Act. So we know we have allies there, and so this presents us with a window of opportunity to hopefully get an executive order signed by the president, hopefully soon. We've been told here in Washington that there's a pretty good likelihood that official English will become a very important issue in the 2020 presidential campaign, which makes sense because this is an issue that to some extent it's part of the larger immigration debate as well, and it's something that resonates with a lot of people, here in the USA. And so, we're about to kick off a very busy year in 2020, and hopefully there'll be an executive order signed by the president at some point during the year.
The history of a lot of this. First of all, I remember talking to a woman who was running an organization for people who are coming here from Latin America. This was 25 years ago, and she was trying to help them assimilate, once they came here. Mm-hmm. And she told me, she said, language is culture.
Exactly.
That's the part of this that always gets me, is that the people who object to this notion are objecting then to our own culture. And somehow they feel that making this statement is what's the word? They use that word inclusive all the time. It's not inclusive. Are they just mad, or do they have some more sinister purpose that they're using to block this?
Well, I think it's both, frankly. I think there's a lot of false compassion that people have when they take a stance like that. I do a lot of media. I do a lot of talk show interviews like this one, and sometimes people will call in that don't like what we're doing, and they'll say, oh, you're anti-immigrant and you're not compassionate, and this is a terrible thing, blah blah blah. And I say to them, look, if English becomes the official language of the USA, then if you're a new immigrant, a legal immigrant to our shores, number one, welcome. Number two, if you immerse yourself in English and become proficient in the English language, then you're going to have better job opportunities. You're going to make more money. You're going to be in a better position to support your family. You're not going to have to go on government welfare or any other government programs. By making English the official language of the USA, we're giving you a better opportunity to achieve the American dream. We are the compassionate ones. For people that oppose what we're doing, what they are basically doing is keeping immigrants under their thumb and keeping them in a linguistic ghetto, which is going to be almost impossible for them to have any sort of success in the USA. So we are the compassionate ones in this thing, and I think there's a lot of false compassion based on emotion on the other side.
Wanted to mention we're coming up on 9:14. We're at 19. Our guest, Stephen Gushov, he's joining us this morning from Pro English, and as he mentioned, he's just a couple of blocks away from the nation's capital. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. The other aspect of this, you talked a little bit about how you might have to go find a translator. I remember 15 years ago or so, I was working at a talk station back east, and I came across a story that said in New York City, they were teaching 18 different languages in city schools, including, I think it was Tagalog, which is a language very few people speak from somewhere out in the Pacific region.
And Philippines, yeah.
Yeah, and so you have to hire all this additional staff at taxpayer expense. And I would talk to various state legislators who would defend this, saying, well, we have to do this. Again, they were literally going back to their own constituents saying, sorry, but we feel for, whatever reason you have to pay for all of this. And then a lot of those young people never have any incentive to learn English.
Well, absolutely, and I think and it points out you point out actually a very important differentiation when we're discussing language and culture. It's one thing for people to learn languages. We fully embrace the concept of people and students learning other foreign languages in school. I studied Spanish and French and Italian in high school and university. I'm still fluent in Spanish. And so, just in terms of learning other languages, absolutely, that's the best thing in the world. But that's different from the government having an official language. And what we're advocating for with making English the official language of the USA is nothing strange or weird or unheard of throughout the world. Let me give you a couple of statistics. Right now, in the United Nations, about 85% of United Nations member nations have an official language. And 54 nations around the world right now have English as an official language, but not the USA. So what we're doing is something that's being done globally. This is nothing that's mean-spirited or different or outlandish. The entire world has official languages. If we were in Rome right now doing this interview, we'd be talking in Italian, obviously. And like I say, particularly the fact that there are 54 nations with English. Taiwan, at the beginning of 2019, became the 54th country around the world to adopt English as an official language. And the Taiwanese premier, I don't remember his name right now, said something very important. He said, look, we're making English an official language of Taiwan because I want our Taiwanese citizens to succeed internationally. And he understood it, whether we're talking about the USA or any place else in the world. English, in addition to being the main and historic language of the USA, is also the international language of business and commerce and finance. So if you're coming to the USA in particular and you're learning English, and as I said before, immersing yourself in it, becoming proficient in it, you're going to have better economic opportunities. So it's nonsensical for people to oppose something like this.
For people listening today, what would you recommend that they do? I just from my own at least my own experience here in this job, a lot of people listening are sitting out there saying, "Yep, I'm on board 100%." What do they then have to do individually?
Well, I would recommend a few different things. Number one, for more information, visit our website. It's proenglish.org. That's proenglish, all one word, .org. And you can get lots of information about what we're doing in Washington and all around the nation with regard to official English legislation. I also would ask them to contact their members of Congress, both representatives and senators, and tell them that they want their members of Congress to support the English Language Unity Act in Congress. Again, it's already been filed. It's already been sponsored in both the House and the Senate. In the House, it's H.R. 997. That's H.R. 997. And in the Senate, it's S678, S678. So call your member of Congress, your representative, your senators, tell them you want them to support and co-sponsor the English Language Unity Act. I also would advocate for them to call the White House, and tell the White House that you want President Trump to sign a new executive order making English the official language of the USA. Because whether you're a member of Congress or you're at the White House, they listen when constituents are calling in and saying that they want something done. So talk to your representatives, talk to your senators, call the White House and tell them you want official English as the official language of the USA.
We got to get to a break in about 40 seconds, but can you stick around for a few more minutes after that?
Sure, absolutely.
I've got a couple of questions I want to pose, and I know that on some state levels we've had some of these activities that have been going on. I had in fact, he was a neighbor of mine in another state many years ago who would propose this every year in his state legislature, and he was the lone voice, it seemed. And unfortunately, he left public office, and I don't think anybody's picked up the baton. But I want to talk a little bit about what people might even be able to do on a state level when it comes to all of this. We've got more coming up. Stephen Gushoff joining us this morning from Pro English. It's still hanging in the teens. We're at 19, 20 minutes after 9 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Stephen Gushoff is joining us this morning from Pro English, and we're talking about efforts to have English as the official language of the United States for government business. You're not going to be pressing this on people as they're walking up and down the streets in their communities, which I think is where sometimes we see people, at least the opposition, gets off the rails on this without really knowing all the details. We're at 9:23 and 18 right now. Bill Colley on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Thanks for joining us today on Magic Valley this morning. And Stephen, I was bringing this up just before the break. There is periodically some efforts, I know, on state levels where legislators have brought this forward. Is there any activity that we're seeing around the country at the moment that's noteworthy?
Yeah, right now, all across the nation, 32 states have declared English as their official language. So 32 out of 50 states have official English. And of course, we're looking to add to that number. You have official English legislation, I know, there in Idaho. And in recent years, it was very close that Michigan and Georgia might be added as states number 33 and 34, but it didn't quite get across the finish line. One issue, though, that I would mention with regard to states and official English is that enforcement becomes the other issue as well. And I'll give you an example of California. California has official English on the books, but it's California. They don't enforce it whatsoever. It was passed whenever it was passed many, many years ago. But right now, in this day and age, they don't enforce it. So it's one thing to have official language on the books in a certain state, in any state, but then you need to enforce it as well. A few states that don't have official English that we're working hard to add them to the list. Again, I mentioned Michigan, for instance, Texas, Nevada, New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio. Those are a few of the different states around the country where we're trying to add them to the list. A few of the upper Midwest states as well, not too far from you, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and as I said, Michigan. All those are among the list of states of the 18 that remain that don't have official English. One other thing, too, and it's not quite a state, but it's a commonwealth, is Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico obviously wants to become the 51st state. There's been a bill filed in Congress to make Puerto Rico the 51st state, but what we have said here at Pro English is that if Puerto Rico wants to have any chance of becoming a state, it has to declare English as the official language of the island, which it has not done so yet. And so we're actively involved, in states and even in the Puerto Rico issue, in addition to trying to get federal legislation passed.
Media reaction, and of course, over the weekend, I shared a story that I'd seen online with one of your cohorts, and you'd seen it a couple of weeks ago from the BBC, where they immediately point to their source being the Southern Poverty Law Center, that you people are being mean, and then they claim that you're not returning their calls. But it's quite typical to see this, especially among foreign media, of course, at least in England, is not much different than ours.
Well, exactly. And look, whether you're talking about the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Boston Globe, here in the USA, or NPR, or if you're talking about the BBC overseas, again, these are people that are never going to agree with what we stand for, and we know that the media is a mixed bag. We've received wonderful coverage from Fox News Radio and Salem Media and newspapers in Atlanta and Las Vegas, and I've been on Newsmax Radio and Breitbart and many others. I did an editorial for the Washington Times here in Washington. So there is a lot of positive media coverage that we have had. John Gizzi, who's the White House correspondent for Newsmax, I did a nice interview with him earlier this year, and he actually used the interview to ask Sarah Huckabee Sanders, back when she was the press secretary for the president, he asked her at a White House press conference, what was the official stance of the White House with regard to official English, and she said she was in agreement that yes, that the official stance of the White House is official English and making English the official language of the country. And so we receive some good media, but again, we know that not everyone is going to love what we do. And frankly, it goes back to the issue that I raised before, where there's a lot of false compassion on the other side, where they think that they're being helpful and nice to immigrants by not having them learn English. But again, what they're doing is they're keeping them in poverty. They're keeping them in a linguistic ghetto if they don't tell them to immerse themselves in English and become proficient in English. That's not being mean. That's being helpful to them so that they can earn more money, get a better job, better support their family, and better achieve the American dream.
We got a couple of minutes to go. I was mentioning during the break to you that part of the one of the factors being cited now in the election results in Great Britain happened to be that they keep burying it in the stories, but it says mass migration. And I think a lot of traditional voters there can't walk down the streets without feeling as if they're in a play about the Tower of Babel, and that may have had a great deal in swaying the election in the direction of the Conservatives.
Well, I think that's probably correct. And, as I stated before, official English is in many ways part of the larger immigration debate here in the USA as well as in Europe. And you're 100% correct when you talk about the Tower of Babel. I spoke at a church in Dallas recently and in a speaking engagement, and I used that example where here in the USA, we do not want to become a modern day Tower of Babel. Or, if you look at Europe, we don't want the balkanization of the USA as has been seen in Europe. Look even to our neighbors to the north in Canada in terms of how much it costs them every year to do everything in English and French. And so these are things that we need to avoid. And as I also said before, English is the international language of business and commerce and finance. So even in Europe, they're dealing with a lot of the same challenges that we are here in the USA.
Quickly again, the website is?
proenglish.org.
And again, if people go there, they can find a lot of detail and probably some pretty good instructions on how they can go forward and make their voices heard.
Absolutely, yeah. We encourage people to go to proenglish.org to learn a lot more.
Stephen, good talking with you. Hope to touch base when we get some more news on this soon.
Absolutely. I always look forward to it, Bill.
Hey, thank you. Take care now. Stephen Gushoff joining us this morning from Pro English from his office in Washington on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's a balmy 18. We may make it to 30 today. So, just to throw that out there for those of you who are looking for a little bit of hope. In the meantime, a short break, and then, hey, we're down to the last half hour of this morning's program. So much to do, so little time.